was often operating in that flight state, in that state of urgency, and doing so much to the point that I often didn't know how to rest or be still with myself. And what I didn't realize is that was largely because I often didn't feel safe. When we are in these varying states of stress and survival, we are not in a state of rest, digest, and repair. Instead of actually repairing our cells and doing routine maintenance within our body, we are essentially focused on survival and protection from threat. Really, stress is subjective. One of the biggest lessons that I have learned as I have reversed the autoimmune disease and symptoms I used to experience is that my nervous system state was heavily connected to the symptoms I was experiencing. In the past, if I look back, I was aware of what fight or flight meant, but I didn't fully understand how to identify myself when I was in those states. And I also didn't realize that there were other states that were impacting me as well. So, the fight state most of us are familiar with, and this can look like physical fighting, emotional fighting. It can look like blaming, defending, and even fighting what is presenting within our reality. So, certain levels of denial. With the flight state, this often looks like either physically leaving the situation and even emotionally leaving the situation. So, this can look like actually running from our emotions through avoidance, through distraction, through staying really busy. It can also look like doing a lot and this state of hypervigilance or urgency that can feel like there is so much to do and so much to not only stay on top of, but to stay ahead of so that you can create this sense of safety and security. And what I didn't realize is that I was often operating in that flight state, in that state of urgency, and doing so much to the point that I often didn't know how to rest or be still with myself. And what I didn't realize is that was largely because I often didn't feel safe. Because remember, these nervous system states are responses to threat or overwhelm. So when we are in a constant state of threat or overwhelm, this is when we are kicked into these states as a way to actually protect ourselves. And so I actually want to go deeper into this topic using this glass as an analogy here, because there are a couple other states that I want to share with you that are deeply, deeply related to many autoimmune symptoms. And I'll share that with you in a moment. But for now, consider this glass, the actual container, as being the container of our nervous system. So, the capacity that we have available at any given point of time. And this may be a little bit of an oversimplification, but consider this water as being the emotional energy actually present for us at any given point of time based in what it is that we are experiencing. So, this might be our level of stress, the level of intensity of what it is that we are moving through. And the important thing to understand with this is this doesn't only affect the current emotional state that we are aware of and actively processing, but this also includes the unprocessed emotional energy and unprocessed survival stress from the past that we may have disconnected from. And so when we are threatened, or when the level of intensity of that emotional energy moving through our system reaches capacity, this is typically where we go into overwhelm and go into one of these threat responses, such as fight or flight. And now, the other two responses that I want to share with you are fawn and freeze. So, with the fawn state, this is where someone would be hyper attuned to the emotions and needs of others. This can look a lot like people pleasing and aiming to satisfy or appease somebody else's needs, desires, and feelings, often at the expense of your own, because if you do so, that achieves some level of relational value and actually helps restore that sense of safety when you are feeling overwhelmed or threatened. And so for me, I realized after the fact that I would often go into this state where I was hyper attuned and aware of everyone else's needs and desires, but also largely disconnected from mine. And I felt sort of lost and unsupported through the translation of all of that. The other state that I didn't realize that I was largely in much of the time below the surface was a state of freeze. And this can be the most tricky state to identify because with the other states that I just mentioned, there are some pretty clear signs that you would be in that state. Whereas with a freeze or functional freeze state, the very nature of this state is actually one of disconnection. And when you are disconnected, it can be really difficult to actually see or identify that you are disconnected. And so the reason that we would go into this state would be if there was a threat or level of intensity that is present that we can't fight and we can't run from. Often we have no other choice to endure what is present and actually protect ourselves than to freeze, which is essentially to dissociate. So, the way I perceive this is that a portion of our consciousness or awareness actually fragments off. And along with that, oftentimes the pain of what is actually going on fragments off along with that. But the important thing to understand here is that pain, that intensity, that stress doesn't actually just disappear. That actually lives within our nervous system and within our cells, tissues, and organs until we actually develop the capacity and take the space to process through it. And so when I mentioned that water in the glass includes both current emotion and stress that we are processing, as well as past unprocessed emotional energy or charged survival energy, that's what I mean by that. That exists within our system and it can take up a lot of space. So for me, I often felt chronically stressed and overwhelmed, even though I was somewhat disconnected from that a lot of the time and was just managing and pushing through. And what I didn't realize is that my container was so full of all of that unprocessed energy that anything that came into my experience, I had very little space for. Now, with a functional freeze state, it often looks functional, but the key thing to understand here is that there is often a varying degree of disconnection from your body, from how it is that you really feel, from what it is that you need, as well as from your true capacity. So, that level of disconnect can range from something that is mild to something that is more severe, such as just numbness or shutdown. And what I found to be the key here is to actually work on restoring a sense of safety within by actually processing through that charged, unprocessed energy that is existing there beneath the surface. So every time you actually create the space to be with the sensations and emotions that are present in the now moment, what happens is that we actually start to process through that charge that we are holding. And this does two things. First, it gives extra spaciousness within our system to be with what is actually coming up within our life without going into a state of overwhelm or distress, which is often associated with these symptoms. And that the other thing that happens is that we are able to actually build our container and capacity within our nervous system to expand our capacity such that we have more spaciousness so that we can continue creating real change within our lives, take different actions as we start to transform these patterns, and also create more of a baseline and dynamic range within our system so that we can come back to a state of regulation and safety much more quickly. And this is really important because when we are in these varying states of stress and survival, whether that be fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, we are not in a state of rest, digest, and repair. And this can make it really, really hard on our system, as well as on our organs, our immune system, our digestive system, because instead of actually repairing our cells and doing routine maintenance within our body, we are essentially focused on survival and protection from threat. So, when I realized this, it was really profound, not only to build awareness around what state I was actually in from a nervous system perspective, but how that was actually impacting the functioning of my immune system, digestive system, and basically every other system within my body, on top of how I felt within my daily life. Because as I have seen, ease is a state of being, and so is dis-ease. So when we are chronically in that state of threat or overwhelm or stress, that is not a state of ease. And again, when we go back to that energetic state of being the root of whether or not certain pathogens can actually bind within our cells, it becomes really, really important to continue understanding and addressing what it is that is actually taking us out of ease within our lives. And the last thing I'll mention on this topic is that really stress is subjective. So, when I started my journey of actually understanding how all of this worked and understanding how much stress was linked to my flares, I started trying to manage that stress based on what was causing me stress externally, whether that be a relationship or a job or whatever was presenting within my experience. And at that time, I didn't realize that it was actually my beliefs and perceptions that were actually at the root of what created stress within my life and system or not. Not only that, but when we are managing stress and purely seeing everything as being external to us, it becomes really difficult to develop an internally sourced sense of safety where I'm okay even if versus I'm okay only if this isn't here, only if I get out of this job. Because oftentimes those perceptions continue to live within us until we take the journey of actually starting to understand and delayer them, which actually shapes our experience of stress from the inside out. So, if you're listening to this and you are curious as to whether there may be those deeper energetic or nervous system roots beneath the symptoms that you are experiencing, I'm inviting you to get your free guided rooting practice, which is linked below. And that is essentially a 20-minute guided process that takes you into reconnecting with your body, opening up the lines of communication from within, and gently pulling up those deeper energetic roots so that you can start to explore and witness and experiment any sensations that actually come up through that process. And what I find is that this opens very different conversations that are much more empowering from my perspective around the deeper roots that are present and the deeper roots that you are actually able to process within yourself beneath these chronic symptoms. And if you'd like to go deeper into this work, this is exactly what we do within my signature immersion, Rooted, which is designed specifically for mothers experiencing autoimmune or similar systemic symptoms to not only learn how to discern and understand the various layers that may be present beneath their symptoms, but also to equip yourself with an integrated roadmap on how to continue delayering those symptoms going forward. I am currently accepting applications for my next intake, and you can find all of the details below to check it out and to apply. I would love to hear in the comments what came up for you as you listened, what resonated, what didn't resonate, What did you maybe feel some resistance towards, and what might you have further questions around? So please feel free to leave me a comment, like this video if this provided some sort of value for you. And I also invite you to subscribe to continue receiving these videos. I will see you in the next one.